Hi gear nerds, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to have a deep dive look at the analog delay module on the Quad Cortex. I'm really loving the Quad Cortex right now. It's a fabulous piece of equipment and I find it really inspiring. It's making me play more and more every day. But the analog delay has got a load of parameters. It's not quite getting exactly what I expect out of an analog delay. So I'm going to try to explore the parameters, see what all of the parameters mean on the, I'll try and say parameters a little bit more, what they all mean on the Quad Cortex by demoing them and exploring it a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is compare it to a bunch of other delay boxes which I've got here on the table. Most basic one being flashback delay. What does the analog sounds like on that? The next one up, I would say, is the Boss DD200. By the way, this is a super delay. It's really nice and usable, great form factor, easy controls, and surprisingly powerful, actually. And then, of course, the big daddy of digital delays, well, maybe not anymore. It's about 10 years old or something silly, but this used to be the big daddy. What's the big daddy now? Meris LVX. Why don't Meris send me one of those? That would be great to play with. So this is the big daddy. And then finally, a real analog delay. So this way huge Super Puss is a really super piece of equipment. It sounds excellent to my ears. The issue with it is that the controls are a bit finicky, and my one's got a couple of kind of bugs that they had. So sometimes it can get a bit crazy and oscillate and so on. Some of you will like that, self-oscillation and all the crazy stuff, but I don't really do that. So here we go. I'm going to go through the parameters on the Quad Cortex first, and then I'm going to put some of these in the effects loop of the Quad Cortex and see how they sound back to back with the Quad Cortex internal analog delay. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, I've set up a test patch. I've turned everything off. The amp I've got here is a high watt, so that's set totally clean. It's going through an IR, which is a high watt 4x12. I have set a tiny bit of ambience, but that's just so that the guitar is a tiny bit more pleasant. What I've got here is the mono delay, because some of the delays that I'm going to put this back to back with are mono, so I thought I'd try it in mono. Now I've got foot switch C. If I switch it, it switches between the effects loop and the internal analog delay. So here's a little bit of the analog delay. Pretty good. Let's go, and I've already tweaked some of these settings. So first of all, I've put the mix right up to 85% so that we can really hear what's happening. If the default is something like 30%, this is what that sounds like. If you go to, just on a, for out of interest, if you go to 100%, you get no dry signal through at all. I'm not sure exactly where 50% is, but I'm going to put it on about 85. They sound about equal there. I've also, I'm going to play a little bit with the feedback control. Again, the default is 25%. But if you take it up to 100%, I don't know what happens actually. Wow, that sounds like it's going to get into self-oscillation pretty quickly. So I'm going to take the feedback up to 50 something percent so that we get plenty of time to hear the degeneration of the repeats. And that's the first thing I'd say about this analog delay, is that the repeats don't degenerate very much at all. We'll come back to the drive control when we get there, but let's just take it up slightly, 60%. Now there is a little bit of that warble that you can really normally hear. Anyway, so that's the feedback control. I've left it deliberately high so that we can hear things. Now, high pass control, I'm sure most people watching this know exactly what a high pass control does. But for those that don't, it basically says there's a frequency of sound and I am going to let everything above this frequency pass through, and I'm going to cut off everything below this frequency. So let's just demo that. And you probably heard the repeats get very, very thin. So basically taking away the bottom end. The default on this is 120 Hertz. Bearing in mind that most guitar amps cut off about 75 Hertz at the bottom. So let's take it off altogether. I suppose I would describe it as adding a little bit of warmth to the delayed signal. Now the other one, if you've got what high pass does, the low pass up here does the opposite. So what it says is I will cut off everything above this frequency and I will allow everything below it to pass through. That's why it's a low pass. The things that are lower pass through. So here is the default. Now here's 16 kilohertz, and 16 kilohertz, by the way, I'm going to turn trails off and then do that. Oh, it's still going. Goodness me. You can probably hear, in fact, I should probably turn the feedback down. You can probably hear that is significantly brighter sounding and much more digital. To be honest, that the classic analog sound is a little bit warmer, obviously depending on how these things are tuned. But this is basically, these two controls are like a tone control for your, let's just turn the feedback down a little bit. Tone control for the delay trails themselves. Let's go back to the default. And then let's see how we can go lower. So now we're going to make the frequency range extremely narrow. Now that's really interesting. It's really interesting because when we take out all of the high end, it tends to smear and smooth out all of the delay repeats so that they go together a lot like a reverb. A lot of people use this for high gain solo passages where they don't want the sound of the delay to muddy the sound of their lead. So if I just play some single notes. You can see how the single notes are able to cut through over the bed of delay. So that's one way of doing that. In fact, we could make it even muddier by bringing more low end in. So that is the low and the high pass. Let's just pop them back to their defaults. So on this particular module, on this particular patch, the sync button means that it can sync the delay time to tap tempo or MIDI, and it can sync to quarter notes and dotted eighths and all that stuff. We don't need to do that. I've just set it to a standard delay time. So now we come to the mod rate and depth. So this is just like a chorus, the rate of the modulation going up and down. You've probably been hearing that sort of lovely chorus sound as the Now 3 Hertz is only 3 times a second, so that's really not that exciting. 10 Hertz, 10 times a second. To be honest with you, at 10 Hertz, the sound is a little bit unpleasant. You get a little sort of vibrato thing going on. Let's just go back to the default on that. With the depth, first of all, you can hear a kind of detuning. Let's just go back. I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell me why, but I'm not quite sure why you would ever want that effect. It just makes you feel seasick. Maybe it could go in time with the music, but I have no idea. I would say that's about as far as you would want to go, 10%, 20%, much further than that, and it sounds a bit crazy. However, as we just demonstrated, if you put your low pass filter low down, you get a nice chorused bed upon which to play other notes. So it can be a very, very pleasant sound. Almost a bell-like resonance to it there. Now, the drive is the one that interests me the most here because so there should be some grit, if you like. If you just go back to listen to the basic sound. the later repeats sound almost exactly the same as the repeats at the beginning. So what should happen on an analog delay is that the repeats gradually become dirtier. Now, it could be my imagination, but I don't think that drive control does anything at all. And I'll show you later on with the way huge, there's some really nice sounds in that drive if they could have got that right. Let's put it on maximum anyway. Let's turn the feedback up a little bit so we can hear it going. So as you can hear, there's not really any drive to speak of, which is a real shame because that is one of the cool sounds of analog delay. So if you go to the second page, there's just trails on and off, so nothing really on the second page of parameters. So there you have it. Now I just quickly go back to the standard settings. What's the standard setting? Standard setting for drive is 50%. So here is the standard setting. I'm going to turn the feedback down a bit. Standard settings. Now I've got this set up so that when I press button C, we go to the external flashback. So you can see on the flashback. Now, by the way, all of the delay tone is coming from the TC flashback. This thing does not have any settings to play with. Well, unless of course you go into the fancy tone print software. But now you can hear straight away, if I increase the feedback, this seems to have more distortion on the repeats. Have a listen. Having said that, it really doesn't have that much distortion, does it? Having said that, I still think I hear more distortion and more kind of vintage character in the analog delay. Okay, let's get the next pedal up as a comparison. Oh, by the way, so let's just go back, remind ourselves. Here's the basic settings. That's the Quad Cortex. And that's the TC flashback. Okay, I'm going to switch over to another box and let's see what that one has to say for itself. Okay, we're back. Here is the Boss DD200. Now, this has a lot more controls than the TC flashback had. And so we have got time, feedback, and level, which is standard. It's got a parameter. On this one, in the manual, it says it changes the character and adds some distortion, some sense of distortion. We have a tone control, which is neutral in the center position, and a modulation. So I'm setting the modulation about at the low level. So let's have a listen. Now straight away I can hear all of that swirling distortion going on, and the parameter is actually set to 0. Have a listen. Just go back to the Quad Cortex. I think you can tell straight away the Boss analog delay is much more vintage sounding, much more crinkly. Crinkly is a tape word really, but just a whole load of lo-fi, lo-fi-ness about it, which the Quad Cortex doesn't have. Now let's just explore a couple of the parameters on the analog delay on the Boss. So I've switched back to my loop. So if I go for, let's stick something simple on. So let's just up the mod. If I just increase the mod to halfway. Even on maximum, actually it's gotten to the horrible seasick feeling. I would say about halfway is as far as you want to go with that. If we go take it down to 0, here it is without the modulation. Personally, I like it with some modulation, really nice. Here's the tone control. So this tone control generally gets darker, obviously, as you go left. So let's take it to the max. And you can see how that just creates a bed underneath, although not quite as mushy as the Quad Cortex was. If we put the tone control on max, we should get some really bright repeats. Actually not too bright. We'd have to go to a digital setting really to get the super bright sounds. And I've left the distortion till the end. Let's take the distortion up to half. So you can really hear how that distortion control is giving it that super vintage feel. This thing goes totally crazy. It actually increases the feedback, because actually that would be a natural way for that an analog delay to work, is that as you increase the gain going into the delay processor, it increases the feedback as well as increasing the distortion. So having just heard that, if you just go, let me just put this on, say, half. Switch to the Quad Cortex. This is so much cleaner. Now,
We only have the drive on 50%. Let's put the drive on maximum. Let's increase the feedback. And that is with the setting below half on the distortion. If I go to maximum again, the boss is still going. Okay, let's stop. I'm going to go, next up is going to be the timeline, which has got a whole lot more parameters. So let's see what we find when we do that. Here is the Strymon timeline. So this Strymon timeline has got a number of settings: time, repeats, mix. I've set the mix deliberately high, I've set the repeats deliberately long, and the time I've set at 530. On the Quad Cortex, it's at 525. The filter and the grit. The filter is a tone control. We'll try that out in a second. And the grit adds some dirt to this. Now, I was just trying it out. I don't actually think. I think this is similar to the Quad Cortex. So this is the analog delay. They call it D-bucket. Pretty clean, I would say, at stock settings, but I've got the filter and the grit turned all the way off. Little bit of modulation on there, just to remind you, the Quad Cortex. I have to say, the Quad Cortex modulation sounds beautiful. Okay, a little bit extra with the timeline after you turn those knobs up. So let's just go back and see what the filter control does here on this analog delay. Up to half. I'd say it's taking away bottom and top. But it's definitely doing that thing where it's putting the delay in a bed underneath your individual notes. So let's just move that back, have a little bit of it. And let's try the grit, go up to halfway on the grit. Very similar to the Quad Cortex, just a tiny bit of distortion. If I put it on max, now, I don't know whether you can hear that, but you can actually hear some distortion, like a sort of digital distortion being put on underneath the repeats. Let's see if I can. But it's not really distorting the way the Boss did. The Boss had a lovely lo-fi distortion to the repeats, but this is not doing it at all. So the messiest we can make it is if we turn the filter up to the max. And there, when the filter's up to the max, you get a sort of reverb noise. I'm going to say I'm not really impressed with the Timeline. It's worse than the Boss in terms of it's less vintage sounding than the Boss, and it's actually less hi-fi, less gloriously rich than the Quad Cortex. So maybe you like it. I suppose you could say it's its own thing. Okay, I've been saving up the real analog delay till the end. Let's see what the real analog delay will do in this company. Welcome back. We've now got the real analog delay in the loop. Here it is. And just to remind you, here's the Quad Cortex. By the way, the Quad Cortex has still got the drive set to maximum here. So even now, the gain on the Supa Puss is actually set to minimum. When I turn the gain up, it will go crazy. But we'll get to that in a minute. And straight away, you can hear that sort of chirping of the distortion going through the delay and gradually getting worse. Wow, lovely. Now, this also, I've got the tone on maximum, but even on maximum, it's pretty dark, so you're always well above the repeats in your playing. So this device is a lot like a reverb when you've got it on big settings. Wow, did you hear that? The way that degenerated into distortion. So the modulation is also very lush on here because it's got this sort of random thing. Oh, look. See, it does those weird things. So I've taken the modulation off. If I add just a little bit, and you can see it's got this sort of strange bug when you adjust things. Now I don't want to adjust this to crazy levels, but this thing gets seasick pretty quick. So you just have to look at what's happening. It does this all the time. It's a bit of a crazy machine. It's still going. It's just a mad machine. that is the price that you pay. Welcome back. I just had to try and calm this machine down. It's like dealing with a house cat. Wait till I turn the gain up, it's going to go crazy. So this is the tone on maximum. If I turn the tone to middle, so just a little bit darker. The tone all the way down, it's very, very muddy. Really gets underneath your notes. I'm just going to turn it up a little bit while we sample some of the gain. You can see how the gain just goes crazy. Yeah, it's one of those boxes where you can put a sound into it and then it goes a little bit mad. So you have to be super gentle with the gain control. That's on at 1/3. And it increases the feedback so much. If we put the tone down though, just to remind you, in comparison, the analog delay on the Cortex sounds like it's a digital delay. So if we go back to the Supa Puss, you can hear that crispy, crunchy noise in the background. It's still repeating. That's with a little bit of gain up and the tone down. If you turn the tone up a bit, you can hear the crispiness come through a lot quicker. The Supa Puss tried to put a dodgy analog delay into a box with loads of controls, and it's got tap tempo and all sorts of weird things. But I have to say it's ended up being a bit of a dangerous creature. Okay, that's everything about the analog delays that I've got. Oh my goodness, stop. That's everything about the analog delays. Let's have a look at some conclusions. Well, I've just had a very enjoyable time playing through all of those delays on those various devices. What do I think? First of all, the Quad Cortex remains a fabulously inspiring piece of equipment. The sounds, the delay sounds from the analog delay and from the delays are rich and warm and really inspire my playing. Having said that, they're nowhere near as organic and interesting, lo-fi, vintage, call it what you will. They're nowhere near as a couple of the others. I think the big surprise for me, well, although I already knew it was a pretty good box of tricks, was the Boss DD200. The Boss has a beautiful sounding analog delay emulation in there, even though it's a digital device. And I suppose we shouldn't be surprised. Boss have got a long history of creating great guitar effects. The other thing about the Boss is the controls are incredibly simple and intuitive, which I have to say can't really be said for the Strymon Timeline. Every time I sit down to use it, I find it frustrating. I never know what setting I'm turning or what they mean and which one of the buttons sets time and what the difference is between presets and manual control and so on. So I find the Strymon frustrating. I think I would say of all of the sounds, actually the Strymon the Strymon Timeline was the worst. I suppose. I was just listening to the thing close up on its own. There's no way you could tell the difference, obviously, in a mix and all that sort of stuff, or live, of course not. But, and so don't shoot me if you're a Strymon Timeline fanboy. In fact, I want to believe that the Timeline is best because it's got the most knobs, and Strymon give off such an aura of professionalism that you want to believe that they get it right. But honestly, when I listened there back to back against the Cortex and the Boss, it wasn't as good and not as enjoyable. Maybe I had the wrong setting. Of course, the Puss sounded super. And you straight away get into a load of vintage lo-fi nonsense with it. I personally am not the sort of person who sits there driving delays into self-oscillation for fun, but it certainly had something which I can't quite put my finger on. I think it was just that the sound quality was quite bad, and because that was bad, it gave a gorgeous bloom and bed to the sounds that I was making on my guitar. So the Puss was great. Just by the way, a quick mention for the TC. I think the TC was very bread and butter, very basic sound. Nothing wrong with it, but there was no tweakability, no knobs, nothing to make it really sound the way you might have wanted to. So really, perhaps not ideal for a tweaker or someone who's looking to perfect their tone. So overall, I would say I'm slightly dissatisfied with the analog delay tones from the Quad Cortex. Do they sound great? Yes, absolutely. Does it sound like what I would expect to get from an analog delay pedal? No. There's nowhere near enough dirt and distortion going on, and it's that special kind of analog distortion that I think you would have heard with the Boss and especially with the Puss, because that's a real analog distortion that's going on there in the repeats. And there's something magical about those repeats if you're an aficionado of analog delay. So I do trust that the Quad Cortex has got a lot more development to go, and I think they will update these sounds and make them sound more authentic. In the meantime, it's just as enjoyable. It's just not quite what I would call an emulation of an analog delay. Of course, as always, your comments and questions are always welcome down below. If you've got this far, please hit the like button, please hit subscribe, and of course hit the notification bell. It would be great to get extra subscribers on the channel. It helps me, and I'm trying to push out as much content as I can that would be interest to nerds like you. Okay, see you next time. Thanks a lot.